right, so Gray Matter Games, what does the name refer to?
Well, I originally came up with it because my name is Brian, and then my screen name is Brain, because it's like a dyslexic Brian. And then at one point, I named my PC Gray Matter, because like the stuff in your brain. And yeah, just kind of stuck with that name. And
So it kind of grew
yeah,
organically.
yeah.
So now let's talk about the game you're developing, Computronium.
Yes.
Computronium. Can you tell me a little bit about the game?
Yeah, so the idea is sort of like bring the fantasy of like running your own data center to nerds like us. I think with you see pictures of, for example, the big NVIDIA data centers now with like liquid cooling and everything, sort of a management style simulator for something like that. Yeah, Computronium will be multiplayer first with mod support. We're also planning sort of more Factorio style enemy encounters. So I think in Satisfactory, you go more towards the like exploration to come across enemies, whereas Factorio is more enemies come at you, and that's sort of what we're going for. So you'll have sort of like tower defense almost aspect. Yeah.
And what are those moments in the games that you think will be like the most exciting to players? That they think like when they see it, they'll go like, "Oh, that's so cool."
I think we have this concept we call silly numbers. So we want really, really high amounts of compute, really, really big numbers, like bandwidth in the exabytes or even further kinds of situations. I think those will be like some of the most exciting for certain kinds of people. The other aspects are the like design technical challenges. So I think people like seeing blinky lights and things moving through their system from a high level, and kind of marveling in their own complexity that they've created. Yeah, I think another one is just sort of the goofy moments that I want players to have of like, oh, like your player ran and tripped over an Ethernet cable that was laying across the ground or something. So
You actually occupy like a human body inside the data
yeah,
center.
so
like
it's a robotic body.
I see.
Yeah, yeah.
You've already been involved with quite a few startups in the past.
Mhm.
Can you tell me about some of those?
Yeah, so the first one was called Intern Rocket, and it was sort of like a Match.com meets LinkedIn, but for internships. That one, I left my job at Wolfram Alpha to work on full time, and that went for I think roughly about 2 years until the other founder, CEO, and I sort of had disagreements and parted ways. After that, I started Immersion Arcade, which was actually the first virtual reality arcade with the HTC Vive in the United States. We ran that without a location, so we went out and did public events during the summer, and then that was during like the end of winter, spring era. And then during the summer, we actually had a location that we were able to secure for just that summer that we ran 4 stations out of. We also kept doing public events with a mobile setup as well.
So it was never the purpose of selling it as a product. It was more like a
Right.
experience.
Yeah, it was an arcade. So, children birthday parties or there were bachelor parties that came in and they wanted to rent out. The venue that we had was really hot for like receptions, for wedding receptions. So people would come and like rent out the VR during the reception, mainly for the kids. Yeah. The other one, so we lost our lease for that particular venture. And that was not due to anything other than just the owners of the building were able to secure a longer term situation. So we toyed around with getting a bigger, different place, and the economics just didn't really make sense for us. We also toyed around with providing sort of like a software as a service platform for other arcades. And we sort of didn't find that market yet. It was still way too early. So instead, I had, through a consulting company that I had also made, a connection with a local founder that was creating Quick Picks, which is my next startup. And Quick Picks was sort of like Uber, but for photography services. That one made it really, really far. We developed the whole software solution. And the problem that we ran into, though, was just financing in Chicago was where we were. The finance options are really, I would say, more conservative in that area. So they wanted to see traction and stuff, and because we had an app ready. The problem was we needed, money to make advertising to actually get the users. So that sort of petered out and died.
And Uber for photography, what does that actually look like?
So you would sort of, if you were to open the app, it would be similar to Uber where you put a pin on the map, except it would also have like a scheduled time. You would say, I want a photographer here at this time, and you would pay $100 an hour was the rate that we were trying to get. It wasn't meant to like supplant like wedding photography, for example. It was more to like grow the pool of like potential things you might decide to use a photographer for. So if you were going out for like an evening and you wanted just like good pictures of it, you would say, oh, I want a photographer for an hour at this stop.
Because what excites you about starting things, building startups?
Yeah, I think the creative expressivity of I get to make what I want to make and not really worry about what somebody else thinks. I can kind of go really meticulous on the details of the technical stuff too. I have lots and lots of little technical hobbies, so bringing them all together is really nice. I don't really mind so much the hat switching because I like lots of challenges in lots of places.
You never found it difficult because you are obviously a very technical person yourself. How do you deal with it, like the things like marketing, networking, the interpersonal stuff?
Sure. The marketing stuff is a little bit more difficult. I haven't quite put my finger on that 100% yet. I'm trying sort of some more grassroots approaches. I think because I'm technical and the game that I'm making is technical, I can speak to technical people. They like the technical aspect of that. So it's a little bit easier to like, you yourself kind of like understand what the game is and like why you might want to play it. The other aspect is of like sort of grassroots approach is, in Blue Sky, I've found it pretty early and I got on a bunch of starter pack lists. It just sort of like grew without me really having to do much intervention marketing wise. And so from that, I pretty much just post little updates about like, here's what I'm working on. And probably don't post as frequently as I probably should. But another one that I have touched, which I haven't really, I don't want to say advertised on, it's more that I've engaged with the community is Hacker News.
Yep.
So I know that the Hacker News community itself would like the game that we're working on, but also the technical aspects of how we're making it. So Rust and the Bevy engine is really interesting, I think, to a lot of people. But also we're making open source tools. So the first post that I did there, under Gray Matter Games, essentially, is an open source tool that I wanted to share to the Rust ecosystem. So
indeed.
I think that's another aspect that I'll sort of follow is the Rust ecosystem in general. So they have their own forums and like their own newsletter that I'll put my open source contributions on as well.
And was that a huge difference between running your startups and working for a company?
Yeah, I would say for me, from my position, I think I was chosen specifically because I had that startup experience, that I was able to wear a lot of hats. Psyonix was very independently driven by people inside the company. So it worked out well for us. I think what soured me to it was after the Epic acquisition, it became more of like a corporate type environment.
Oh, so you really noticed the difference after
Yeah.
the acquisition.
Yeah.
Now, how was the atmosphere like during those first couple of days that everybody learned about the acquisition?
Well, for me, I was super new to the company. So I thought we were just being brought in for, a regular company meeting, but it was, Psyonix and Epic together. It was like, oh, what did I do? But yeah, I think for the first 2 years, it felt like Psyonix. So it felt that we were aligned with what Epic wanted anyway, which was simple things like, removal of loot boxes and that kind of stuff. Free-to-play launch, obvious one. It was like over the course afterwards that it became, I think, more driven by corporate interests. Yeah.
So it slowly changed over time.
Yeah.
Okay.
And as people left, I think a lot of the original employees have left, in the time between, even before the layoffs. So
I see. Now, what are some of the lessons you learned from those early startups?
I think marketing plays a huge role. It's absolutely massive. I think in Quick Picks, we had the problem of we actually made the app before we asked for money. And I think if we hadn't made the app yet and we were like, here's the idea of what we're going to make, people would probably have invested a lot earlier. I think before that, Intern Rocket for me personally was like having the right people on your team. I think part of the team was awesome. Part of the team I didn't really agree with on a personal level. And I think that's important. So, my founders now, obviously, we are in full agreement on everything politically and ideologically. So made it really easy to make decisions about the company.
Now after your startups, you worked for quite a while at Psyonix.
Psyonix.
Psyonix. Quite a big studio. How was your experience working for a AA or AAA developer?
Yeah, I think actually I might be able to answer one of your earlier questions that I kind of missed too. The public face-to-face aspect. So I think my time in startups gave me a little bit of that, public, speaking opportunities, that kind of stuff. But Psyonix gave me more of the one-on-one aspects, because what I did there was server engineer, at least initially, for Rocket League. So that meant, dealing with specific server providers and partners and sort of making sure that everybody's on board, mediating between different teams within Psyonix as well, since there's so many different moving pieces to try and pull together a release. Specifically, we did the free-to-play launch of Rocket League, and that was a big, I would say, less technical on my side, more technical on the rest of the studio side, but I would say more procedural in getting all of the right people together and all of the right equipment available for us.
Tell me about your other co-founders, because did you meet them through, one of them through Psyonix?
Yeah, so I met Scott through Psyonix. He was online services. And because I was server engineer at the time, later moved to gameplay programming, but server engineer at the time, I could do things with him and we could collaborate on specific technical needs that I had.
So it was a click right from the start on a technical level.
I think technical level was really easy. It was the personal level that happened almost immediately too. Just because we're very like-minded in our ethics and our philosophies. So,
now, did you start Grey Matter Games right from the start with him, or did you only join after a certain amount of time?
No, he started with us.
Okay,
yeah. There was the idea that I had in my mind of, I want to make a studio. And it wasn't until I was like, okay, I'm going to go for this and do it, that Scott also was like, yeah, I'll come on board with you. Yeah.
And was the vision, did you have a shared vision right from the start?
We had a shared vision on how we wanted to run the company. I think we didn't necessarily know which game we wanted to make right away. We have a lot of ideas for a lot of different games that we want to make. But the thing that we're aligned on immediately is like how the game, how the ecosystem around the game is formed. So we're focused on co-op, we're focused on PC and modability.
Now tell me about the third co-founder, Stephanie, because she has a very interesting background.
Yeah, so Stephanie is my wife, but she was before working in hospice and as a music therapist. She's also trained as neurologic music therapy. So the idea for her is to sort of bring those skills into the audio and music design of the game. She also has a background in international relations. That's one of her degrees. So actually coming here was a lot easier because she's able to pull everything together.
Now, then joining you guys for in the founding of the company was probably a big step for her. How did she react when, or was it her initiative to ask like, hey, can I join the company? Or was it you who asked her?
Well, we do a lot together. I think it was, she already knew from the moment she met me that I was very big into entrepreneurship. Her not so much, but we actually got married just last year.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And I think part of it is like she's introducing me to her life and I'm introducing her to my life. So hers is more internationally based and mine is more entrepreneurial based. She actually lived in Dubai for several years. And she also got one of her degrees in Australia. And I think she also lived in South Korea for a period of time. But yeah, I think previously would have considered moving outside of the United States before meeting her. So we owe a lot of our, I think, future or potential success to that.
So even like, even if I were to give you $1 million tomorrow, you wouldn't want to expand the team?
I don't think we would expand it unsustainably fast. I think having the correct amount of people for the job is important. So for us, I think adding on an artist is an obvious one. Adding on somebody to manage the community is another really big one. Those are things that we can't really, or we don't have skills already developed for those. But I think adding a team of 10 people to the mix so that we ran out of cash, within 6 months, no, that's not the way to do it. Yeah,
that makes sense. You originally lived in the US.
Yep.
But then you decided to move to Belgium, to Kortrijk.
Yep.
Why was that?
So originally, when we were deciding on making a company work, we looked all around the United States, places that we might move. We were looking at expenses and sort of the environment that we wanted. And we couldn't really land on anywhere in particular that we were excited about. We had previously been Chicago, like I said before, but San Diego was where we were at when I was at Psyonix. And I think once you go to San Diego, you're kind of like peak because it's just really nice weather. But yeah, I think we had this dream of moving to Europe at some point. It was more like a retirement idea in our minds, I think. But at some point in that, examining all of the potential locations we might go, we came to the conclusion, well, let's look at Europe. The first step that we tried was actually the Netherlands. And that was because of my time at Psyonix. I had connections to a lot of people out there. And they introduced me to a wide network, business network. And then through that, coming to Gamescom, and I met Yuri from VAF. And he was like, come to Belgium, we have the best cyclists in the world. I was like, oh, okay, we got to a certain point in the process, because we were serious about the Netherlands, that I don't think we were getting, it wasn't that it would be impossible, but we weren't getting a whole lot of assistance. And with the way it would have costed us to live there and all the difficulties it would take, we were like, well, let's look around. And the conversation I had had with Yuri came to my mind. And so, yeah, when we started the process here, it was super easy. It was a lot of help given to us from both government and the ecosystem in general. I think everybody was willing to give us as much attention as we needed to make this work.
So you actually feel like the environment for indie developers is better here in Belgium or in Europe than it is in the US?
Yeah, absolutely. I think as an entrepreneur, not just as an indie game developer, I think it's much easier to build here. You have assistance programs for sure, that's potential, but I think just daily living, we get healthcare coverage is an obvious one, but we're able to just not have a car, for example. So we bike everywhere and we take the train if we want to go somewhere far, and we get to visit all sorts of interesting destinations. The work-life balance is also really nice. I think as a startup founder, you kind of have to force yourself to be more work-life balance, but it makes it easier, I think, here.
Yeah.
Because it's the natural state that everybody has. Yeah.
So in the US, it was all work,
Yeah.
play.
Yeah.
Came home at like 8 o'clock in the evening and then quickly had something to
Yeah.
eat before going to bed and then starting again at 5 a.m.
Yeah, I think there's a particular kind of hustle culture in the United States. It works in some ways. I think if you're on board with the idea of like, I'm going to raise a lot of capital and I'm going to build a company really, really fast, then it can work for you. However, I think if you want to build something small and sustainable, this is a much better situation.
And that's the kind of company you're going for.
Yes.
Because what you're actually trying to do is put your love that you have for building servers, tinkering with hardware, and put it in the game.
Yeah, I think if I'm able to get the sense of what it's like to be a self-hoster, for example, in a game, then we've achieved what we've set out to do.
In that sense, will it actually be able to teach people about real stuff that they can actually use in their own servers? Or
Yeah, and I think games that exist already sort of already do this. So Factorio and Satisfactory give you a sense without being a software developer of like how to develop software. And we're just taking that like a step further by relating it to the actual concepts themselves. Another thing that we'll have is certain types of servers. So you'll have computationally powerful servers, whereas there's some that are more storage oriented, some that are more GPU or parallel compute oriented. I don't know if we'll borrow specific industry terms. We might steer away from those and make up our own things, but it should be pretty close in relation. And you should get a good sense of what it's really like to develop these kinds of systems.
now you mentioned that you're probably not going to use like actual industry terms. It's probably to make it more accessible.
Partially to make it more accessible, but also to not conflict online with if somebody's searching, for example, throughput or bandwidth or something, that they don't get our game instead of a real thing that they're trying to do.
That makes sense. Yeah. So you envision your target audience to be nerdy people who are very technically minded. That's kind of your audience.
That would be our initial target market. I think additionally, we would like to have the co-op and goofy aspects sort of be appealing to just everyday people, people that would play Minecraft, for example. So I think the building aspects sort of cater to that. Another thing I think Satisfactory does really well is sort of like the really pretty designs. So sort of like going out of your way to make things look interesting and unique. And so we're going to cater to those kinds of players as well.
I see. So initially you're growing for a very niche audience, but then you plan to broaden it.
Yeah.
By the silliness, the goofiness of it all.
Yeah, silliness, goofiness, artistic expression.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah.
Now, the sense of having a pretty niche audience initially, was that something you did it deliberately, or was it just because you wanted to create this game and hey, it came with this audience?
I think it's because I'm that kind of person. and my co-founder Scott is also that kind of person. We want to make a game for us, so it's just natural that the kind of people that we would be targeting are people like us. Yeah.
And did you already run prototype tests with actual players?
Yeah, so we've done several in-person play tests here. We have meet and play. And then we've done also a public online play test. It wasn't huge, but we got enough feedback to know where we should move our focus.
And what were the responses of those play tests?
People were having fun, even though there wasn't a whole lot to do yet. I think somebody said that it felt really, really polished already in like the movement mechanics and sort of like the building mechanics. The other aspects, I think the multiplayer itself worked out really, really well. But the things that we need to work on are just core game loop, building your network, getting your contracts, and fighting enemies, for example.
Yeah, I see.
Yep.
Were there any memorable moments of those playtests? Things that people thought were really exciting or something?
It wasn't necessarily something that was really exciting. It was because we have like a capsule. It's just a placeholder for the player at the time of the playtests. We had sort of like this lore come about in the playtesting channel of like this really esoteric kind of like this being exists on this alien square, and there was one that was like all praise the being, kind of like screenshot taken. Yeah.
So then you decided to also implement a narrative to the game?
We do want to do a narrative. I don't have a whole lot of details about that, but that kind of stuff might make its way in somehow.
Will it also have like a campaign kind of deal, or is it just multiplayer?
So it will be multiplayer. Think of it more like Minecraft's story, for example. You achieve specific goals and then things happen in the world.
I see. Yeah. Are there any other art forms you enjoy? Are there any movies or books that you particularly enjoy?
Recently, I haven't traditionally been a big book reader. I've only like recently sort of gotten into it. I started reading the Culture series. That one, it's kind of got me a little bit hooked. It's super nerdy space stuff, obviously, so it got me. But yeah, other art forms, I think just, I'm not a huge movie buff. I enjoy certain kinds of films, Christopher Nolan films, like obviously, like, but I come from sort of an artsy family. So my mom is more like hands-on crafts, but my grandma was a painter. And so I got a little bit of visual arts skills from them. I can't quite do like 3D modeling like an artist that we might hire would, but for example, I did our logo. So I did that in sort of vector art is my particular taste.
So you, with your very technical background, you're kind of the odd one out in your family? Or the odd one in your family?
Oh, yeah, not really. On my dad's side, my grandpa was a physics professor.
Oh, wow, okay.
So he was more mathematical and technical, and I have fond memories of doing code breaking with him and doing math problems. He introduced me to Ramanujan when I was really, really young and showed me infinite sums and stuff like that. So
now, what was your family's reaction when you told them you would move to Belgium?
I don't think that they were surprised, to be honest. I had moved to California not too long before then. I think it was 5 or 6 years. So I'd been away from home, so to speak, for quite a while at that point. But they always knew that I was, I don't know, the crazy one or something, that I would go and do these crazy things. So I think one of the things that really got me was during the 2020 sort of like unrest. There were marches going on through San Diego, and I joined one of those, and just like seeing the collective action of everybody together was like super motivating. One of the most profound experiences, I think.
Why did it move you?
it was like a very large sense of unity. It was like everyone moving together for one thing. Yeah. And I think being in the States, you're used to just sort of being siloed off from everything. And in that particular case, I felt like, oh, these people are with me.
Mm.
Yeah.
It also is that sense of community also something you try to establish in your games?
Yeah. Obviously, with the co-op nature of our games, we're looking for stuff that's not competitive and really brings people together. I think that part of being here is also, for us at least, we chose to be part of the gaming community or indie community here specifically.
So you get a lot of value out of just being part of a community,
Yeah.
working in a co-working space with other game developers.
Yeah, and I don't think it's like just a transactional value either. It's we get a sense of camaraderie of like, hey, we're working on this hard thing and you're working on that hard thing, and yeah.
You use a lot of open source software.
Yep.
Why do you use so much open source software?
Well, I've always enjoyed working on contributing to open source technology. I think it's, again, one of those like really interesting aspects of like cooperative humanity. I think also you get certain, by not having your engine, for example, tied to, a corporate entity, for example, you also get like perspectives from all over the place that come in to contribute and just make the thing better.
What do you mean by that? Like if you take Unity, for example, you think it's a very monolithic tool or
Yeah.
a tool with one view, whereas Bevy is a very multilateral tool?
Right. And I think it moves a little bit slower because obviously it doesn't have the corporate backing, but you get really, really highly technically efficient design because somebody that knows a certain system really, really well becomes the person that does that thing. Companies can do that, but I think that they're not going to do that for the long term. They're going to focus on things that frankly, I don't care about.
Yeah, that makes sense. Usually about making profits.
Exactly. Yeah. Profits, or even like some flashy system that doesn't really, work for me in what I'm doing. I can usually find some plugin to Bevy, for example, that does.
You've also contributed to open source yourself. Can you tell me about your open source efforts?
So I've mostly just released my own open source software. I haven't contributed in a major way to any major projects. I've done little contributions here and there to some projects, but I like to release what I'm doing. So the project under Gray Matter Games that we've released is called Unbug, and it's sort of a debugging utility, sort of based on the way that things are handled in Unreal Engine, but for the Rust ecosystem. So it isn't Bevy specific, even though we use it for Bevy, but it'll work for Rust in general. The other thing is, before my time at Psyonix, I also made, it was a sort of bridging, if you're familiar with Vue.js, it was bridging Vue.js and 3D development. So it was a whole sort of like component-based architecture for sort of designing games or 3D web applications in general.
And is that important to you, contributing to open source?
Yeah, I think it's important for me to give back because I get so much value out of all the open source technologies that I use. So it makes sense for me to give back to the community in that aspect.
So do you also use AI a lot in your workflow?
We do not. We have completely avoided it. I think the current generation of AI, for one, it doesn't really suit our needs, and it doesn't, I think, match the marketing hype. And in addition to that, I don't like the ethical implications of what it's been trained on. So I think right now you have AI that's been trained on a lot of people's work, and they're not being fairly compensated for that work. And then there's also this, I think, interest from from the corporate side in particular to try and replace people with these tools, which I don't agree with at all. I personally, I've tried it here and there. You know, the thing that I would be most interested in would be like coding, but it's not at all, I would say, coherent or capable of producing logical code.
And even if in the future it gets so good that it actually is able to generate large chunks of code in the style that you want, or doing exactly what you want, would you still not use it out of the ethical implications?
There's maybe a version of that makes sense. I don't know what that looks like. I think it would be a completely different architecture of what we're seeing right now. Yeah, and I think ethically speaking, I don't want to replace employees. For example, I think if we're some crazy, highly advanced utopian society where everything is just like made for us, like maybe, but I think the structure of our society isn't built for it yet.
What do you mean by that? The structure of our society isn't built for that?
Like the capitalistic society structure, it works off of human labor.
Yeah.
And in order for people to survive right now, they have to make money. And I think the only way you're going to get past that is something like maybe UBI or something. I have no idea what that looks like. One of the problems that I have is that the labor that's used to produce these large language models are really only benefiting the people that are running these huge companies. So you're having this like wealth flow from one side of the population to very few. Using these tools also like legitimizes them, even though I don't think that they do what they say they're marketed to do. There are obviously some real applications for certain aspects. I think, for example, things like language translations, which what they were originally meant for, are a perfect example. There's also specialized AI that I think is also super useful and super important stuff for like medical diagnoses. But the hype that went into this particular iteration of large language models, I don't think is a good thing for us.
I see.
I had this thought the other day. I was watching my cat. My cat was watching me put away dishes, for example. And there's no chance in the world that my cat has any concept of like why I might be organizing my dishes. Like to us, it's like obvious. Oh, I want to know where the forks are. I want to know where the plates are. I think that the cat has more understanding of what I'm doing than a large language model. A good example is large language models can't play Sudoku. And every single day I do tasks that are way more complicated than Sudoku puzzles.
Yeah, I see.
So I don't think they're capable of building a technically complex project. The way that I heard it phrased before, what was it? You can put 100 years of jazz into an artificial intelligence and you can never get rock and roll out of it.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah. And I think mankind has this ability to not just remix and rematch, but also just come up with wholly new ways of doing things.
What would success look like for this game?
I have a very specific definition of success. I want, at some point in the far future, I'm just browsing YouTube and there's somebody, no matter how popular our game was, there's somebody that posts that they loved Computronium and this is why. And yeah, they took the time to make a video or maybe even a social post, for example, even if it's just one out of a billion kind of situation.
Well, this is a very specific definition for successful. Why that and not like in terms of wish lists or revenue or?
I think it's a tangible thing that I can aim for of like, I know I want to make a game for somebody that's this good.
After Computronium, are there any concrete plans?
We have other game ideas. I think another one that we would like, because we like survival crafting in general, is sort of like almost a primal man simulator is another kind of idea that we have. I want to explore space at some point as well. I'm just a huge space nerd as well. So,
And what's the common thread between all those ideas?
common thread, multiplayer co-op for sure is a common thread. Maybe a common story somehow. I don't know, but we'll have to see if that works.
Also like crafting, survival, or at least crafting and putting things together, or?
I think crafting is a big part of the kinds of games that I like in particular, but it isn't the only kind of game that we want to make for sure. I mostly play co-op games for sure. The ones that I'm playing these days are like Helldivers 2. Recently, I want to get back into Elite Dangerous. So I have a whole stick set up for that and everything, which I finally got working on Linux. So I'm like super happy about that. Another one is No Man's Sky. I've been playing a lot of recently, but yeah, when I'm not working, it's mostly working these days, but
And
yeah.
it's hard to still enjoy games now that you're a developer yourself?
I don't think it's hard to enjoy them. Hard to find the time, but I think certain things can really annoy you. Like, oh, this is an obvious design decision problem, or this is corporate influence or whatever. And then some things can like blow you away. Like, oh man, that must have been super hard to do. So
it gives you even more respect for
yeah, right.
great design and whatnot.
Yeah.
Is there any advice you would give to aspiring indie developers?
Sure, and it's probably bad advice, but I'll give it. Don't be afraid to take it kind of slow. You'll never feel comfortable with the speed at which you're going.
What do you mean by that?
I think always I feel like I'm behind,
Hmm.
even though I hear from everybody around me that I'm doing just fine.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, it simply takes a lot of time, game
Mhm.
development. And where can people find more information about Grey Matter Games and Computronium?
Yeah, so we have Computronium on the Steam store. That's probably the best place to go right now. You can reach me on Blue Sky as well. That's at brianjesse.com. I think maybe we'll put a little link
We'll
up
put
or
a link in
something.
the description. Yeah, definitely. All right. Well, thank you very much for this interview.
Yeah,
And
very welcome.
yeah, good luck with your game.
Thank you.